Welcome back to Rhinestones and Rants, where the sparkle is real and the tea is piping hot. My name is Alyssa Better, businesswoman by day, but dance mom for life. Today, we're going all in with the one and only Maia Suckle, former studio owner, lifelong dancer, and the queen of telling it like it is. We are spilling all the backstage secrets, when she knew she had to open her own dance studio, what pushed her over the edge, and how dancing professionally shaped her vision. And if owning a dance studio turned out to be a dream or a full-blown plot twist. We're also breaking down what makes a healthy studio and what major red flags you just can't ignore. So sit back, buckle up, because Maia is here and she is not holding back. So click that like button, share the love, and make sure to subscribe. Let's sashay into it. Welcome to Rhinestones and Rants, where the glitz of the dance world meets the real talk of industry. And a dance mom who lived it every day. This podcast isn't just about perfect pirouettes and dazzling costumes. It's about the raw, unfiltered journey of raising dancers, navigating the competitive scene, and balancing the chaos of life beyond the studio. So grab your coffee or wine, adjust that messy bun, and join me and special guests for a little bit of rhinestone-covered realness. Click that like button below, subscribe, and let's get into it. So welcome, Maia. I am so excited to have you here.
Nice.
It is so full circle for me. How long would you say that we know each other?
Oh my gosh. I think Joelle came when she was, 10, 9?
Oh God, I think you're right. Like, I think we know each other now probably 6 or 7 years, possibly. Is that about right?
Yeah, the years go by so fast.
It goes by. It's so true. It goes by so quickly.
Yeah.
And you know, it is a full circle moment because I met you obviously because you were opening a studio and we were looking for a new studio to really focus on technique.
Yep.
And you know, who knew that you would become one of my closest friends on the other side of this?
Yeah, you never know.
You never know how it's going to happen.
Is full of adventures.
So you have such an interesting journey, and you know, there's so much, like, I think that tells a story of who you are leading up to you opening up a dance studio. So I thought perhaps we can start by just exploring that. Like,
Sure.
What is this? What was this obsession or love, passion for dance, and how did it all start?
Well, I started dancing when I was 3. As we know, many dancers started when they were 3. And my mom put me in ballet right away. So for me, it was all about ballet and technique. And I started off at the Maryland Youth Ballet, which is where Susan Jaffe and Peter Fonseca and a lot of greats started there. So it was phenomenal technique. I was part of their company. I danced at with the New York City Ballet at the Kennedy Center. And we also traveled Central America. And then after that came across country and started doing, at that time, it was jazz, and then they started hip-hop. I'm dating myself. But anyway, jazz and hip-hop, went to UCLA, dropped out of UCLA because I got a scholarship at a very famous jazz or dance studio here in Los Angeles because I wanted to work in front of the camera, and then I did. I started doing film, television, theater, just everything. And then I got an agent and just... started working from there. So it's been a while.
I think what's so amazing about your background, I mean, I think everybody should be able to tell this. I mean, you have had performance in you since obviously very young age, right? Forever. And that is something that, you know, I try to tell everybody when your kid does dance, like, you can do dance recreationally, and that's great. It's sort of like putting your child in soccer or football or whatever, and you know, they go and try it. But, you know, at a very early age, you obviously acclimated to it where you were like, okay, I love this. And your mom and your parents actually started to, you know, contribute to that passion that you had, which drew you through this whole journey.
Absolutely. Usually around 10 years old, you have to make, I know with my own daughter, usually you have to make a decision whether they're in soccer or dance. Whichever way you go, you have so much commitment involved there. So soccer, there's just so much commitment, and dance. So usually around 10 years old, you kind of have to figure it out.
That's so true. I mean, that's when it becomes all of a sudden like, are you getting real or serious? And how are you going to take that? So you obviously had a daughter. You have a son too, but with your daughter, you know, it had to be like, oh, I have a daughter now. I get to have another dancer, like, to be able to share that love and passion that you had with your daughter. And I was not a dancer. I was a gymnast, but same thing. When I had my daughter, it was like, ooh, tutus, bows. Like I'm so excited about it, and I couldn't wait to get her into her first ballet class. So obviously, you were a dance mom first, and you took your daughter, and I know her well, and I know that she loved dance as well, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But what was it that through being a dance mom, like, was there any kind of big drama or big happening you may have had in the back of your mind, like, oh, I want to open up a dance studio?
Yeah, I think especially here in Los Angeles, and knowing my background and what you needed in order to be either a working dancer, a serious dancer, even a company dancer, just anything that was more professionally oriented, I couldn't find a studio that had it all, that had amazing technique, that had ballet, which is where you get your technique
Of
from,
course.
had the hip hop, had the jazz, had the contemporary, all those things all wrapped up in one. I couldn't find that studio here. It was very frustrating. So there was an amazing ballet studio, and then there was a great competitive studio, but I couldn't find one that was married. And I just knew that LA needed that. And it was very frustrating. So that's why I decided that it's like, this has to be done.
Yeah, and I and when you're very similar to me now knowing you. It's like go big or go home. So, but what I give you a lot of credit for, I think that there are a lot of people out there that say, oh, I'm going to go open my own studio, or oh, I'm going to write a book. I need to write a book. But people, they say those things, but they don't necessarily always go ahead and do it.
I
Like,
think if it's a passion, and this, like, as soon as that came to me, you can ask my husband, it was like, there was no holding me back. There was like nothing holding. There was no doubt in my mind, and it was just the train left the station, and I was just committed to opening up this studio.
but was there a specific event? Like, I know a little bit of the story, but I want to share the story with everybody else.
Sure.
Was there a specific event that took place that you were like, okay, that's the final straw? Like, you might have had it in your head, like, I want to open up a dance studio, but was there something that happened at the studio that you were at that said, okay, it's time to go and put this.
Yeah, I would say that, when I started seeing the kind of, I guess, the unfairness and a lot of the dysfunction of the studio that we were at, I think there was a lot of favoritism, and my own daughter didn't get her fair share of attention. And I just saw that there wasn't a really good instruction. There wasn't good instruction, and there wasn't good leadership. And I felt like I could do it better. I also come from the business world as well, but from the entertainment side. And I just thought, you know what? We need to get someone in here solid who knows how to run a business and also knows children and also knows dance. So I just didn't feel that was happening at the studio that we were at. There's a lot of favoritism involved, and I don't like that. And especially with children, I think that it's very misguided, and it could really mess up a child's psyche. So I don't like that.
I agree, considering I had a child that went through the ups
Yeah.
and the highs and the lows, through the whole dance journey. And I
Yeah.
do think that it's when you have a child, and I did another episode where we talked about, the healthiness, or how when kids are young, they're developing that self-confidence, and they're
Yes.
and when they're spending so much time at dance, if it's dance was what their passion is, to have teachers, it's a responsibility
Yes.
that you have.
So the culture of the studio
Correct.
is huge. And I was determined to have a very positive culture and a very warm, inviting, and loving culture. That was very much what I wanted to establish. And I brought my children up that way. It's what I wanted for our studio. And for me, the families and the kids come first. Just ended up not being that way in the end, but
which we're going to get into.
Which we'll get
We're
into.
spilling the tea, which is true. So in having this great dance background, what do you think from this dance background? Like, you just touched on it a little bit, like you really wanted to create this very warm, inviting culture. What do you think that you tapped into from your huge dance background that you had when you said, okay, I'm going to open a studio, and what did that specifically look like?
I would say discipline. For me, I think children thrive with discipline. They thrive with boundaries, and ballet and technique and all of that provides that already. So I think that part of it was really, really important. So the discipline, I think that just having a really good foundation in the technique and and then also offering all the different genres so that the kids can kind of figure out where they thrive and where they take off from. So I just feel like those things are very important to have in a studio.
And what do you think everybody has dreams or expectations of what it's going to look like. And then you go ahead and you open it up and you're like, okay, this is what was most surprising to you that you thought it was going to be that maybe it wasn't when you opened up the studio. Was there anything that stood out to you that you're like, whoa, I didn't realize I was going to have to be this?
I think, well, LA has its own challenges. LA, everybody wants to come to LA to make it. And that's the same with dancers. A lot of dancers and teachers, educators come from all over the country or the world, but they come here because they want to perform or they want to work commercially. So I think one of the challenges was to actually get educators who wanted to educate the kids. And I think that was part of the challenge for Los Angeles. But I knew that we could find it, and we did find that. We had some amazing educators who really were there for the kids. And I think one of the biggest challenges for us was to work with them, work with their working when they went out and actually did a job, and having somebody else come in and make sure that they could pick up and really love and nurture the kids. So that was a challenge. The other challenge were the dance moms and the families.
Dance moms, right? I'm a dance mom,
Yeah.
so I know that,
Yeah.
and it's always interesting because May and I have spoken before about, she was like, you and I, we should be partners. And I'm like, I'm not dealing with crazy dance moms because I'm a crazy dance mom. And like the last
But
thing
you
I would
get
ever,
it.
I get it. But
On
the
that
last thing I
side.
would have ever wanted to do was open up a dance studio and deal with crazy moms, which
Yeah.
brings me to my next question for you. It's like, I remember being in the studio and pure pandemonium going on in the studio. Everybody's running from class to class. There's parents in the lobby. There's little kids.
Yeah.
And in the middle of all of it, I just took a look one day and I saw you just staring into one of the windows, watching the kids dance. And I was really touched by that because I was like, in the middle of all this insanity that's going on, there you were just watching these littles, really babies,
Yeah.
dancing. And then you turned around and you saw me watching him and you're like, I just love watching them
Yeah.
so much. And it was like, that was the moment that I got it, where I was like, she loves this.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't, it wasn't the way I looked at it. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't look like this wasn't just a business for you. This was a
Absolutely not.
passion project. This was like you were putting your heart, blood, soul, everything into what you were trying to develop. And
I think that whatever you're doing when you're a kid, and whatever your passion is when you're a little, it's hard to like let it go. It's always going to be there. And for me, I've had three other careers, and I've kind of made a 360 right back to where I started from, and it was dance. And I just absolutely loved it. It was something that was in me from when I was a little kid, and I love seeing that with the other little kids. I mean, you just watch them and they're getting the technique, and they're starting to perform, and they're getting so excited, and when it's time for recital, when it's time for competition, or when it's, they put the costumes on and they're doing all these things. It's like that's where their passion starts, and it's just going to grow from there. And I feel like, God, if I could be a part of that, and if they can remember me as part of their youth, that's huge, because I remember those teachers when I was little. I remember them, I mean, to this day. Huge.
what was the most like that was the joy that you got
Yeah.
from having a studio?
Yeah.
What would you say was the most surprising or shocking, or it could be disappointing, it doesn't have to be, thing about you didn't really think about before you opened up a studio besides Crazy Dance Moms?
Okay. It's not even Crazy Dance Moms. I mean, I was a dance mom too, so I could get it. I think that the worst thing of all was picking the wrong business partner. I
Yeah.
would say. I should have done it by myself, and I didn't. I kind of wanted somebody by my side, and I initially went to the old studio owner, and we were going to partner, and then she was tired. She wanted to retire, and I didn't blame her. And then she kind of told me, well, what about my friend? And I thought, oh, okay, well, we could do that. And that was my mistake. This was my passion and my brainchild, and in hindsight, I should have just gone running with it on my own. And that's a lesson learned. I think choosing the wrong partner is really detrimental. So yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, you even think about relationships, right? And people say, okay, we're going to get married. And there's always like that, both sides of the coin. Like, should you live together before you get married, or should you not live together before?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I know that there are I could argue both sides of the coin on that, but it's a lot different when you're friends with somebody. Really, you could be best of friends with
Yeah.
somebody, unless you either marry them or you go into business with them.
Right.
And when you're dealing with money and you're dealing with finances, all of a sudden people's values and their initial like breeding, their wiring
Yeah.
comes into play. So,
Right.
when did that like, I'm not looking obviously to bash anybody. I'm looking to educate other people
Yeah.
that might be thinking about opening up a business.
Yeah.
And, let's say they do want to go into partnership, because I don't want to say that partnership is bad.
No,
Like,
it's not inherently bad. I just think that, I know for my sake, and is that we had very different work ethics. So I think that your work ethic and let me tell you, and opening up a studio, and you can talk to, I don't know, anywhere from 50 to 1,000 studio owners, and they will say this is a career in passion, because it takes a good like 12, 18 hours a day of pouring hard, sweat, tears, everything into it. And my business partner wasn't about that. I think it was more about the fun of it and the just the competition of it, but it wasn't about the business of it. And so your work ethic has to align. And I think that your morals and your values, not just your vision of the studio, because our vision for the studio was the same, but her upbringing, my upbringing, her values and morals, my values and morals did not align. And so when it came to how to run the studio, how to be responsible for the kids and the families of the studio,
which is a huge
which
responsibility,
is
by the
huge
way.
because you're shaping these kids' lives. And I'm a proud parent, and my daughter just graduated college, and I would say that, and she turned out really good. I'm
She did.
proud.
She's fabulous. She's
I'm
so
really
fabulous.
proud. She's a
And I'm going to
great
get to talk to
girl.
her and do another episode, which I'm really excited about as well.
She's a great, loving, compassionate girl. So am I. And so, for me, the kids and the families come first. You're doing that for them. You're here educating them. It's an experience, and you're part of their development. And you have to work with the families that way. We are not, raising professionals already. They're not professionals already. They're children. And yes, we want to get them to that place. And it's our responsibility to do that. But yeah, there's a give and take, and there's a responsibility for the morale of the studio. The morale of the studio, the culture of the studio. There's a huge work ethic that needs to go into it. It's just a lot of work, and I loved it so much. And you just have to make sure that if you're going to go into partnership, that all those things align.
And being a parent in that studio, I could tell you, I didn't see it at first, but I did notice like little pieces of it when there was a specific break. So what advice would you give parents that walk into a studio when they're looking to pick a studio for their child, and there is a partnership? Like, what are questions, perhaps, like we're also a dance mom. So
Mhm.
now, knowing what you know, if you went in and you were looking for a studio, let's say for your future granddaughter or whoever, and you saw that there were partners, what would be good questions for you to ask these studio owners to make sure that there isn't a break? Because being in the studio, knowing that there was a break between both of you as owners of the
Yeah.
studio, it wasn't always pleasant to be in that studio. Not that
No,
I was
which
in there,
is
but
such
there
a
was
shame.
it was a shame, because
Such a shame.
we could ask you a question and you would be like, okay, this is what I think, and then the other owner would be like, no, this is not what I think. So what's a warning or some questions you think that would be really good for parents to ask before they sign that contract?
Yeah, there should be a very clear delineation of responsibilities. And you should be, as a parent, you should know exactly who does what. And they should be the communication between the two, the communication with the parents, the communication with the staff and the faculty should be crystal clear. So
and
when
on the same page.
and on the same page.
There cannot be a break.
Yes. And I mean, the org chart needs to be very, very, very defined. And as much as I knew I wanted to define that, my partner was more lackadaisical, and she didn't have a lot of business experience, and she didn't really want to work with that. So, if there are any conflicts, that's a big red flag. If you don't know who to go to, that's a red flag. Everything should just be very clear, very transparent. You should get your questions answered. Your emails should be coming back answered. very straightforward. Everything should be, very transparent.
What would you say, in switching gears a little bit
Sure.
from the poor partnership to, you mentioned before about dance moms, right? So,
Yeah.
what would you say one of the hardest conversations you might have had with dance moms, whether it's about how their daughter is progressing or son is progressing, or whichever dancer that you had? Were there any very difficult conversations you had to have that really stand out to you?
There were many actually. I mean, because kids develop at a different age or a different pace. I'm sorry. And you really can't. c- Parents want to compare their kids. They see, little Amelia over here who's like who's fast tracking it to like, a pre company or something. And then, but you know what? Over here, Sandra is not. She just isn't there yet. That's not to say that she won't get there, but maybe she needs 6 more months. Maybe she needs another year in a certain level, but that's her path. And I think that it's really hard for parents who especially don't know the dance world to understand. And they have to trust. If you're going to pick out a studio and invest that money and time, um, then you need to then let go and trust the educators there, just like you would in an elementary school or in a junior high school. You have to trust who you are sending your kid
And
to.
you bring up a
So
valid point in that. When I did the episode about, choosing the right dance studio, we were talking about so many different things. And the one thing we didn't talk about, which I really wanted to talk about, was leveling. So when you go to a studio, and I'm just explaining, like when you go to a studio, there are sometimes studios do it by seniors, or they do it by, 10 and up, or there are classes for beginner, intermediate, advanced.
right,
They call them levels, 3, 4, 5, 5 being in a lot of studios the most advanced. But every studio has it, so it's an important question to ask.
right,
When I came to your studio from Fierce, the reason I really wanted to make the move was I needed to really increase Joelle's technique.
hmm
It was she had everything else, she had the performance, but the technique was lacking.
right,
So I remember very clearly having a conversation with you and your partner and saying, look, I really want to focus on her technique. And all of her friends and everybody that she knew, they were going into level 5.
hmm
And Joelle was being put down a level, and Joelle was very upset about that. And I'm sure like there are other moms out there that have the same situation where, it was a hard conversation I had to have with
yeah,
Joelle because all of her friends were moving up, and, she's like, this is ridiculous. I'm dancing with babies. But no, it wasn't ridiculous. It
no,
was very important. But I want to point out what I love so much about what you did, and this is why it is such an important question to ask to owners. I said, if at the beginning of the year is usually when people get put in their level.
hmm
At like in August, you go back from summer vacation, there's boot camp, whatever, and then all of a sudden classes start. And
right,
that's when the studio owners decide which pathway your kid is going to take. And Joelle was put down. So I had a conversation. I said, if she goes and she works her behind off, because Joelle's a very hard worker, can she be reevaluated in December? And
yeah,
if she is reevaluated, can we move her up?
yeah.
Because it's important that parents know that a lot of times
They won't.
they will not move
Yeah.
you up. Where you start at the beginning of the year, that's where you're
We
going,
had a mid-year evaluation,
which
and it
was
would be
very
a little bit.
important.
It was less formal. It wasn't like an actual evaluation, but between the teachers and the studio owner, they'll be watching. They'll watch the classes, and they'll say, how far has she come? Is she progressing quickly?
Mhm.
Can she still? Is there still a lot to learn at this level that
Mhm.
she's not there yet? Because if you jump, especially in ballet, I mean, you can't do that, especially in ballet. It's a little bit clearer in ballet than other genres, dance genres,
Absolutely.
right? So if you're not ready, if you don't have certain technique, you're going to do yourself a disservice. You really, really won't compete well. You won't fare well in auditions or anything if you don't learn all aspects of it. However, it really just depends. Again, it depends on the child. So I go back to this. Do not compare your child with somebody else. It has to be on your own child's development and our own trajectory, period.
Right. And I think that, in fairness, Joelle was reevaluated at the mid-year and she was cleared to go up to the next level.
Yeah.
And that came from a lot of hard work. But that really meant a lot to me as a mom. And I think that, for parents that have kids out there that might be struggling, that is a really important thing
Yeah.
that you should be asking studio owners.
Right.
So now moving on to, those difficult conversations. I wanted to share a story because I think that, it kind of brings us full circle. I never really considered myself, and I'm laughing as I'm saying, I never considered myself the crazy dance mom. I never considered myself the cancer stick in the studio, but somehow I found myself in this situation. So, true story. When I first came into the studio, it was a small. They were just opening up. They didn't even have the full studio. You didn't have your full studio
No, we were
built.
building.
You were building
A beautiful 10,000 square foot studio.
absolutely stunning studio.
So we
but
had to rent space for a little bit.
we
Yeah.
rented space
Yeah.
and we went to this other studio, and it's a very, when you're starting a studio, there weren't a lot of people. There was your daughter, the other owner's daughters, friends that they had been dancing
Yeah.
with for a
I think
while.
there was only like 13 of us.
13. And then
Small.
my daughter and one of her really good friends came over because of, at the time, Josie, the most incredible ballet teacher. And, we followed her because
Yeah.
we wanted the technique. So
Yeah.
we left Fierce and we followed her. And so we were walking into a situation where these dancers had danced together for a long time. They were friends. We were the outsiders.
Yeah.
Take all of that out. I don't even need to go down that story right now. But what happened was we were going to compete, and we were forming one of our first pieces, which happened to be a hip hop piece.
Yes.
And Joelle
Not
is
our strength.
no,
at the
it
time.
was not the strength of the studio at all.
No.
So they bring in a hip hop teacher, and Joelle came from a very sassy jazz hip hop background, danced with probably the biggest choreographers in hip hop all over. And RadX was one of the conventions that we were going to be competing at. And because we had danced at RadX before and we knew a lot of the choreographers on that convention,
Yeah.
we learned this choreo where Joelle was put into the back of this piece. And why? Because you were the studio owners,
Yeah.
and the kids that had the studio, they were in the front.
She was also super tall.
She was tall, so also that
So
actually,
visually,
visually it didn't work.
Yeah.
So she was put in the back. Where in this case, I was very happy she was in the back because
Yeah.
I didn't like the piece. I
Yeah.
could not stand the piece. I looked at it. I was like, and Joelle was horrified by the piece. Joelle didn't even want to be in the piece. So I remember wanting to talk to you about it. I was going to pull her from the piece because it was to me and to Joelle, but take me out of it. Joelle was a big deal. She refused to go and dance in front of the Brian Friedmans and all of
Right.
the great choreographers on this piece.
Right.
So I remember going to the other owner, asking when you would be in to have a conversation about it. I'm a professional business-wise, and I knew you don't share dirty laundry out in the public. But remember, we didn't have a studio. We were renting space. She said you would be in. I spoke to both of you about the fact I didn't like the piece. You both said that you loved the piece, but you were never going to put a piece that wasn't good on stage. Fast forward, we go to Radix, we perform.
Actually, I think it was adrenaline. It was the adrenaline that we did.
Was it
wasn't
Radix?
It wasn't Radix.
I thought it was Radix.
It wasn't Radix. It was adrenaline because I just remember that the piece and that hip hop was pseudo appropriate for the adrenaline conventions,
But not for Radix.
not for Radix.
But I thought it was in December.
'Cause
But
we
it
didn't start-
doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter the one specifically.
Yeah.
But we went and did it.
Yeah.
So the kids went and did it. They danced great because they were great dancers.
Yeah.
But
And they
also
performed and,
picture ballerinas doing hip hop. For those
Yeah.
people, like a lot of the dancers that you came through with had amazing technique. Like Cameron and all of her friends, they had amazing technique. Cameron was a great hip hopper. Not
Yeah.
everybody in that group were
No.
necessarily great hip hoppers. So they do the piece. My husband was there. We both looked at each other. I'm like, I told you. He was agreement with me, but we didn't say anything. We come out, and then you were so excited because it was, in fairness, look,
Yeah.
you put your blood, sweat, and tears
Yeah.
into this. You put your blood, sweat, and tears
But I also
into
knew
it.
that adrenaline was appreciative of it and that was going to be fine. And I thought, oh, okay, this is okay. I mean, did I really think that it was like an amazing hip hop piece?
But you were excited. So
I was excited.
And
I
in
was
fairness,
excited.
she comes running out, all excited, and she's like, I told you. I told you. That was an amazing piece. And I'm sitting there like,
Oh my God.
and I'm not saying anything. And there's all these kids running into the dressing room.
Yeah.
And she's like, I told you. and she goes, what? You didn't like it?
No,
and I'm like,
you didn't like
and
it.
I'm not going to do it in public, but I'm like,
No,
and
I
she's
didn't
like,
like it.
you didn't like it. And you go and you slam the door into the dressing room. Okay. So then I get the phone call.
Yeah.
Let's brace yourself. I get the phone call on the email on Monday. My partner and I would like to meet with you at Starbucks at 4:00. Does that work? And I'm like, oh, here we go. Dun-dun, 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 dun-dun. And I go to Starbucks, and there they are. On behalf of the partners and I, the owners, we don't think that this is the right studio for you. And I'm like, oh my God, is she throwing me? How did I become the cancer stick? How am I getting thrown out of the studio?
Because here's the thing. When you own a studio, and I think the most important thing is to make sure, because there's all kinds of studios, right? You've experienced that. And there's even more than that. There are strictly recreational studios where it has nothing to do with competition, conventions, or it has nothing to do with companies or ballet or anything like that. So you have to align with the studio's philosophy. And for us, I think what we weren't seeing, and at the time, because we weren't a hip hop studio, that's not who we were. And for us, it was good enough because that's not what we were focusing on. And what was really important for us is that we were working on getting well-rounded, and that was like the beginning of our well-roundedness, or what we hoped would be. But clearly, Joelle and you guys came from a different background, and that wasn't the kind of thing that you guys were used to or liked or wanted.
No.
So for me, it was like we weren't a good fit. And so what we had to do, the two of us, actually was the three of us, was learn or figure out if we could make it a good fit. I think by the end of the meeting, it was like we were going to try to make it a good fit.
Yeah, by the end of and that's the thing. I think in that meeting, there was a sort of mutual respect that we came to with each other. And it was sort of like, look, I'm not your cancer stick. I really tried hard not to make this a public thing. And I think that, I can put myself in your shoes too, and which is what I did that day. Like, I know when you're passionate about something and you put your blood, heart, and soul, and then here's this mom, push-pooing all over something that you really tried so hard at. So I probably, in hindsight, would have made the same decision to have this conversation. And because I know in business, if I have a cancer stick on my team, I need to get rid of that before it spreads. It's just not worth it.
But I think kudos to us because we ended up, because I think I came into it, we came into it saying this is not the right studio for you.
Right.
It just isn't, because this is our culture. This is what we're doing. And clearly this is not working for you and it's not working for us. And you came in and I think you wanted to work something out. And like, I have to say at the end of the meeting, because we're rational people, we were able to work through it. And I think that's important.
You became one of my closest friends, which is a total full circle moment.
Yeah.
Because I think we found out, and through the journey, I really found out that we had a lot of the same values.
Yeah.
We had a lot of the same work ethic. We had a lot of the same passions. And there was a very high level of respect that I held for you and what you were doing.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
For you speaking up and speaking your mind, and always have. And I really
speak my mind. What a shocker! I'm doing a podcast,
and so do I. So I mean, I think that's where, and that's that's when you go, hey, I mean, it goes deeper than this. It goes deeper than hip hop.
It goes so much deeper than hip hop.
It's like, you have to look at the person, and that's what's so important. Also, like when families and kids come in, I think it behooves the studio owner and the people coming in that they really understand that they want the same things. You really have to understand and want the same things. If not, it's just not going to work.
And how would you say that parents, like what advice would you have, or say how parents unintentionally really create so much more drama in a studio that they don't sometimes even realize that they're creating? Like, what is advice you would give to a parent like that you saw and that you experienced that was just very unnecessary?
I think when they start going to other parents, if you want to understand what's happening at the studio or what's going on with your child, rather than, I think that just the gossip is it's not good for the kids, and it's not good for the parents, the moms and stuff like that, to do that with each other. Just go to the powers that be.
Yes.
Try to get a meeting with the teacher if you feel like there's an issue with the teaching. If there's an issue with how the studio's run, sit down with the studio owner. Go to the source and stop with the gossip and the behind the scenes stuff and all the competition and all that kind of stuff. I think it's crazy making. It really is crazy making. Just go directly to the studio owner.
Right. I mean, but people in general, and I've touched on this before, but people in general, I don't know why.
Misery likes company.
They just love, like, they bond on negativity.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it in the business world too, like, around the coffee, like we call them the coffee clutch, but in the kitchen, like, that's the way people make friends, unfortunately, is
Right.
bonding on the negativity.
Right.
And that had to surprise you when having like all of these dreams and fantasies about what it would be like opening up a studio. And then in the middle of everything you're working on, this is
So
what
draining. Like all these other things, these wonderful, wonderful things that could be happening, and then you're dealing with, you know, a lot of drama. You're like, really? Is this what we're doing here?
And when do you think, and that brings up another point, there's so many points in this,
So
but
many points.
so many points, but it does bring up another point. If you know, there's this very fine line when there's drama in the studio, such as a lot of the drama, parents takes place by the window looking in and watching their kids.
Yeah.
But a lot of kids have a lot of drama,
Yeah.
and that generally takes place in the dressing room.
Right.
And lots of dressing room drama. I could do a whole entire episode on
Yes.
dressing room drama, which I actually might. But when do you find it as a studio owner appropriate? Like, when do you step in to stop it? And when do you think that the parents need to step in and stop it? Because I found that a lot of times the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
No.
So when you have mean kids, you generally have mean parents.
Yeah.
Not always, but you generally do.
Yeah.
So when is it become your responsibility as a studio owner? Because I always say, when you go into business, who knew you needed your psychology degree?
Yeah.
Because it becomes very apparent.
Absolutely. Whenever you deal with kids, I think it's important. Well, this is where my partner and I differed drastically. I would say you step in immediately. Like I would have stepped in immediately, and that's what I wanted to do, because I find that the gossip and the mean girl behavior and all that stuff that happens in the dressing room should not be happening, and you should cut that as soon as you see it, as soon as you hear about it. You get in there, you deal with it right away. Unfortunately, my partner and I had a complete opposite approach to that, and what I find now is that I hear that that's a culture, that's a very negative and not supportive culture that's happening at the studio. I ended up selling my portion, and I got out of that studio, unfortunately, because it became something that was so
Unfortunately or fortunately, but
yeah,
depending how you
right,
look at
right.
it. But
So not what I set out to do, and my hands were tied. My hands were tied because of, you know, just a different philosophy, cultural philosophy.
But is it the
So,
studio owner's responsibility?
Yes,
And I say that
I do. I think
I
so.
believe that it is.
I absolutely
but
think so.
if you have an issue
The fish stinks from the head. And so I
right,
do
and if
think
your
that.
kid is going there and you're paying good money as a parent, I'm paying
Yeah.
good money to send my kid there, and then she or he are going to that studio,
Yes.
and there is, let's say, bullying behavior or
Absolutely.
behavior that just not
That needs to
appropriate.
stop right away.
Right. So
Right
I
away.
do, so you do agree that it is the studio owner's
Yes.
responsibility at that point to
Absolutely. And
cut
I
it out.
tried. There were a few times. I mean, even like when we first got into the 10,000 square foot studio.
the most beautiful studio.
Most beautiful studio.
It was gorgeous.
Yeah, I loved
was.
it so much.
You did a
Anyway,
great job.
thank you. Yeah, on my vision, everything just came to light. It was a lot of fun, just a lot of fun. But we had two dressing rooms. We had a big or an older girl dressing room, and we had a younger girl dressing room. And the idea was like, where does it cut off? Where is that cutoff? For me, it was at right when the kids started developing. So it was probably like around 12, 13 years old. Well, most of the kids were older. So a lot of the kids were in the older girl dressing room. That left like two girls when we first started there, if you remember.
Yeah.
Like two girls. I think Joelle was one and another girl. Oh, and one other. There are three girls.
It was Joelle's friend and then another person who had danced with you
right,
prior.
and then a young.
It was three of
exact,
them.
Three of them in the little girl dressing room. So I went to my partner and I said, this is not right now, since we're so small, this doesn't feel good, and it doesn't create a familial and loving and supportive environment to have all the girls in one dressing room and three younger ones. So why don't, for the
Joelle
time
was
being,
devastated.
yeah, why not for the time being we divide it a little bit more equally. There's plenty of room. And she didn't want that. And we have to agree, and it was difficult. It was a very difficult time at that point. But that's where, again, there's difference of philosophies. So yeah.
And would you say that you would, if I said the statement, would you agree with the statement that if you have a kid after you speak to them and after you bring them in and they're still causing the drama, no matter how good they are, do you think that it's appropriate to
You cut them loose.
You cut them loose and get them out of the
Absolutely,
studio?
because what's more important is your business. Okay. Look, if you're going to start a business and all you want is to make a lot of money, that's one thing. If all you want is to have the best dancers, no matter what the price, no matter what the cost, as far as culture and personalities or any toxicity, that's another studio. You want to find a studio, I believe, that cuts that cancer out because you're raising children. And that's my philosophy. Okay. So if you want your child to grow and develop and to be a whole person and to be confident, you need to find a studio that is going to align with your values. And so for me, and I think for most studios that I know, and I used to belong to an organization that had about 1,000 studio owners across the world. And most of them would say, cut the cancer. It's not worth it. It's not worth it, whether it's the parent or the child. It's not worth it to your business.
I agree, but I think that you were in a weird situation because you had so few and you were trying to build a business. And there was a lot of bullying and different behaviors going on. And it was hard because some of that came from partners' children. And it was a weird situation. And I'm not going to go that deep into that.
I think it was an exclusive situation, because that came from, like you said. So it was just, my hands were tied.
It was unfortunate.
Yeah, very unfortunate.
So now switching gears and moving back to the choreographers that you were bringing into the studios, it's very important that, studio owners have really great connections in that world because, your dancers grow and your studio becomes more popular if you are able to get those big choreographers to look at you.
And luckily I was able to do that.
You had such
I think
great
from my past life
relationships.
being a professional dancer, and from my current life at the time, and having worked in the entertainment industry in front of and behind the counter, and then just for like going after at conventions and getting those great choreographers. So we were really lucky that way.
Which was great because that's a testament to not only you, but the environment that you built, because a lot of choreographers won't go and work at certain studios. So, that was really fantastic. So
it was
now you're a competition studio, a rec too, but competition we're going to talk about right now, that part of the studio. And you have the choreographer coming in and they're setting the pieces.
Yeah.
I think this is a question that every single dance mom, you probably had the same question before you opened a studio. What level of influence does a studio owner have with that choreographer who's coming in to set a piece to be able to say who they want in front? And I ask you that question because there are studios and conversations I've had with other dance moms where it's very evident that their child should be in the front, but it was very political. And because maybe a parent spends X amount of dollars at the studio, that studio owner wants to keep that person very happy. They're a great dancer, don't get me wrong, but they want to keep that mom happy. And that kid was whispered in the ear of the choreographer to put that kid in front. And then there's other situations where the studio owners are like, these are the kids that I want in front, period. And then the choreographer who's getting paid by the studio owner sets a piece to that.
Right.
Is that really happening?
Yeah, it happens everywhere.
Okay.
And
so
that's another thing you have to look at. You have to look at the studios and you have to ask around when you go into a studio. Talk to the other parents and just say who happens to be like, how does it work out in the studio where like who gets the featured roles and who, I think you need to do your due diligence and ask, but every studio owner will do their thing. What do I believe? If that's what you're asking, I mean, what I wanted to do, I thought that the most important thing was we always like to try to have the choreographer come in and give a class. And whoever stood out to them.
Talia did a class.
Talia came in. Oh, yeah, most of them did. We would
Talia Favia.
Yes. She would come in and they would give a class, and whoever stood out to them, whoever they liked, whoever inspired them, because look, it's the piece that they're going to be working on. It's their creativity. They want, the best dancers and the people who get them to be in their piece. Now, I do believe in that about 90% of the time. For me, 10% of that is you're still running a business, and your business includes little children and or children who are teens, but they're not adults yet, and they're not paid professionals yet. So if there is somebody who maybe the choreographer is not really engaged with, but who really works really, really hard, or who I know is really good and really should be looked at or should be in the piece, then I'll say something. You know, it's so funny. It reminds me of like there was one actually happened to be in Talia's piece, and she, you know, and she's very particular in who gets her style, who doesn't get her style, and everything.
There's
But
favoritism.
I remember, yeah, there's favoritism too, but you know, and hers is very athletic, and it's hard to do.
Oh, yeah.
It's very hard to do, and it's amazing. And she did a class, and she picked her people. But there was one dancer who she had worked with before, who I really, really thought should have been in that piece. Was also happened to be a very dear friend of my partner's and mine, and was my partner's best friend actually, and who had danced in her pieces before. And that is when I really wanted to go to her and say, look, I really think that she needs to be in this piece. And unfortunately, again, the partner situation, the partner was like, nope, she was very much of the choreographer chooses, and that is that.
Which is crazy because that was like her best friend who
Yeah,
was
it was
who was
crazy.
like the voice of the studio, who like would lay on the ground for your partner.
And her daughter was a fantastic dancer.
And she
Now,
was-
she
yeah,
might
she
not
deserved
have
to
been the
be in the
most
thing.
dynamic of what Talia may have wanted, but she certainly could have done the piece. And we run a business, and they're not paid professionals. So, and I do think that if I had gone to Talia, we could have worked something out, you know, as far as like, you know, so I don't know, but unfortunately, my hands were tied with that too. And I was told absolutely not.
Yeah, and I
So,
think that it is important people do know that there is favoritism sometimes. It
Yes.
does come into play. You know, having relationships and having your child build relationships with choreographers outside is also really important because
Yes.
when you go to these conventions, they call you out because
Yeah.
they know you and they know if they're filming, you're not going to mess up.
Right.
Although, like when Brian Friedman would call Joelle out, I remember she like wanted to throw up in a vomit bag
Right,
because
right.
God forbid you
yeah,
mess up,
forget
he's
it.
not calling you out again.
Oh,
so,
forget it. Yeah.
So, you know, that
And that's good too,
You
by
know,
the
it's
way.
great.
Right? That
It was-
pressure is really good.
that-
It's part of a
it's-
learning process.
Absolutely. So,
Right?
you know, I do, you know, when you're paying good money and you're going to do competition
Yeah.
and you really believe that your kid is really good and
Yeah.
for whatever reason they weren't chosen and you're starting to smell that there is favoritism or the studio owner did have influence of who goes in first. Remember, it is the studio owner's studio.
Yeah.
But if that is not what you deem to be fair, you have every right to go to another dance studio.
Absolutely. You can
because
go always.
because
always.
and you know you had a daughter who was not always featured in the front.
Absolutely not.
She was, and she deserved to be
Right.
featured in the front.
Look, for me, I recognize it. I mean, I was an ex-dancer, so I know my stuff. And so I knew when, when it was appropriate, when it wasn't appropriate. And when it started feeling inappropriate on a consistent level, that's when it was like, okay, this is not okay. It's toxic. It's not. And when you smell that, trust your gut. I mean, if you've gone to the studio owner, if you've gone to the choreographer, if you know in your heart of hearts that your child is not being, chosen for some of these things, go to a different studio. It's okay. I know what the hard thing is that these kids form these friendship bonds and they don't want to leave the studio, but you are the parent. And at some point, you might have to make a difficult decision if your child is constantly being let down. So get in there, get educated, talk to the studio owners, talk to other parents, not the gossip, not that just get as much information as you can and educate yourself. I think that's the most important thing.
I think it's such solid advice.
Yeah.
So now when you're picking a studio, and obviously cost is a really big thing.
Huge.
And setting your price point. So for example, I don't even know if you knew this, but Fierce, from where we came from, they had a very low price point, but there was a lot of upcharging. Upcharging.
Yeah.
And I give her the most I love her. I mean,
Yeah.
she may not like me very much, but I absolutely love her. I think we're talking about respect of a businesswoman. That woman knows how to create business out of a rug. I mean, she's phenomenal. But there was a lot of upcharging. So when I went to your studio was probably double in price on a monthly that I was paying, but there wasn't as much upcharging. There was, if I needed a new pair of tights, if the tights cost $8, you were pretty much charging me $8.
Yeah.
Like you really
Because it wasn't about that. We really weren't there as a business to, which I feel like, in hindsight, there could have been a balance between the two.
Could have made more money.
Yeah, and I think that's where recreation is really good because that feeds the competitive part and the more pre-professional part. Because when you're trying to make a dancer and just everything that goes into it, it's not really about the money at that point. It's really about educating and growing this child, and the team and the
Yeah.
company or whatever they end up calling it. So it's all inclusive in that way because you want those kids to be training, and you want them to be working their butts off, and so that they're really
And
competitive
you
at their
make more
top of their
money.
game.
I mean, I spoke about this in a previous episode, but you make more money on the on the rec kids than the
Absolutely.
competitive
Absolutely,
kids.
because they're there to take one or two classes and they're there for the recital. And that's all amazing. And that's wonderful too,
Yeah.
because they're going to have those memories. But it's about the costumes and it's about the tights and it's about the this and that, the bows and all this other stuff. When you're training pre professionals, it's not about that. And so there is a balance. So you just really need to know what that studio is all about.
And what happens when you have a parent, like a family that you really like, they work really hard, and out of nowhere, because like even when you take a look at today's economy, there's lots of people that are out there losing their jobs right now, and they have invested all these years with their kid in dance, and then all of a sudden they can't pay the tuition anymore.
Yeah.
What and it's mid-season, and these dancers signed a contract, and you're expecting that as a studio owner to receive that money, and then all of a sudden the parents say, I can't pay for it. What do you do as a studio owner? What is your personal
That's
philosophy about
my
that?
personal philosophy is that you do everything on a case by case basis. Now, other studio owners might not agree, but for me, if that child has so much potential and is a hard worker, and as a family and as parents, they have been uh, really responsible patrons, then I'm going to work with them. And if that means that they're going to volunteer, look, a lot of studios, most studios, they need volunteers, because there's so many different facets of
Costume
having the
committee,
having the studio run
yeah.
seamlessly. There's just so much work involved. So that's where committees come in, and that's where volunteers coming in. So I had a couple of parents who were like that, and then they would come in and they would just help. And I could use that help and I needed that help.
Which I think
And
really made you stand out. I mean, I know
yeah,
other studio owners that they were like, you have to pay. You
yeah,
even had somebody who, in the middle of the season, ended up moving
yeah,
to a different state. And I know a studio owner that would have made them pay their contract,
yeah,
even though they weren't here, where you didn't. And I think that that is an important question for families
yeah.
when you're looking for a studio. You kind of do need to ask because that's your philosophy. It doesn't mean that every other studio owner's philosophy is the same. So
No.
things happen.
And I think you only get that by really having a conversation with the studio owner, having a conversation with the staff, and really trying to understand how that business is being run. Do you really have a connection with that studio owner? Like for me, no. Cut your losses. That person who's moving, let them move. You know, bless them on their way, keep them on their way, and then you work hard to get other kids back in and stuff to help your studio out.
So now moving over to your motherly side,
Hmm.
because always a mother first, dance
Yes.
mom second, dance owner third, and I don't know
Yeah.
if that switched ways when you became a studio owner. But
Yeah.
did you open up the studio for you, or did you open up the studio for Cameron?
I think that I think the whole thing was sparked with Cameron. It was sparked by seeing the studio that she was involved in and where there was lacking, and where I knew I could do better. Um, and I wanted to give her that opportunity because I didn't feel like she, first of all, was getting the technique that she needed to get to, and I also didn't feel like she was getting her fair shake. So there's a little bit of the dance mom in there, but when I started really going down that path and the passion, it was all for me. I was
So
obsessed.
appreciate the honesty.
I was really obsessed, and I think my husband first thought it was about our daughter, and he quickly realized that it was all me, and it's something that it was in my heart and my soul to create, and I loved it so.
I
Continue to
could
love
see you're
it.
getting like
I know.
emotional,
I love
like
it so. And, my daughter, who I think is, going to be meeting with you, she graduated with a dance MFA. Um, and I just feel like, at some point, if she wants to open up a studio or do something like that, I would be only too happy to help her. I have to say, it was a big passion of mine.
did you have to make hard decisions being a studio owner when your own daughter was there? And like there are times you want to just like call and like you're making rules for the studio, but let's say your daughter didn't want to follow. Like, what were the
I was
hard
pretty
decisions?
harsh with and that was another thing that my partner and I were a little bit in disagreement. I I was very harsh on my daughter. She lived up to everything, God bless her, but I made her an example of what I thought the student should be in our studio. So integrity is huge for me. Integrity, honesty, good heart, um, good work ethic. Those are things that I instill in my children and I expect in my students. And I wanted her to be the exemplary student. So I feel badly, but I put a lot on her.
It couldn't have always been easy. No way.
I put a lot on her. She had to step up always. So you know, but
So what
she's
would you
better
say
off
that
for
you're
it.
most like, kind of like final words kind of thing? Like, what are you most proud of about your time as a studio owner?
Um, I loved how quickly and how fast we grew, and um, the talent that we got, the families that we got, the choreographers that we got,
Amazing.
amazing
Amazing.
choreographers. So thankful for that. The space, the beautiful space that we created. Um, I loved, and surprising for me because I was never a kid person. I loved raising my daughter and her friends, but I was never a baby, like mushy kids person. But I have to say, I loved, like when you saw me staring in the window, I
Love that
had no
moment.
idea how much I loved watching my new little students growing and seeing them grow throughout the years. Your daughter growing from the time she came to us till now where she's at. Like, and my daughter and just all the little kids that came through. I still keep in touch with quite a few of them. And I love to see their growth. And that surprised
You're gonna
me.
make me cry. You're
I know,
getting
it
all
just surprised
emotional.
me to see that. And just to see dance, just instilling dance into the next generation, I think is so important, especially these days,
I
the
think
arts
I
and
think you
dance.
have so much to be
Beautiful.
proud of. I mean, I know it didn't end
Thank you.
necessarily the way you saw us as the way it was supposed to end, and maybe
Yeah.
that. And I know that it's definitely is not the end of your story by any means. What's your favorite quote? Like, what would be the thing that you would,
Oh.
or what would be the final words you'd want to leave as advice for parents or studio owners?
Um, I'd say like when you have a passion to really go full force and don't think you need somebody by your side um to do it. I think that if you have that passion, put everything you have into it, no matter what, and go it alone. I think that you can do things. I didn't trust myself to do it, and I think that's what you really need. You need to be able to trust in your own ability and believe in your passion and go like 300%, like right down the
Amazing,
lane. Yeah.
amazing advice. Well, I want to thank you so much for being a guest here. And I want to
Mwah.
thank you. I want to thank you so much for opening the studio because not only did my daughter get an incredible dance education, but I got one of my closest friends,
Me
which
too.
I'm so grateful for, like
Me too.
so grateful for. And, I hope everybody was able to grab a nugget, something to take with you. Obviously, there's a lot to unwrap here, but,
Yeah.
the whole theme of this is if I only knew then what I know now. And I'm hoping that all of you know something more than you did when we started this hour. So thank you so much. Again, if you like this, please click that like button. Make sure you subscribe, share the love, and remember what I always say, never let anybody dull your sparkle. Thank you so much.
Don't let anybody treat you like regular glue because you're glitter glue. You sparkle, you shine. Get it, girl, get it, friend.